decisions and to have this kind of decision making role. So over to Lavanya.
Thanks, Swati. Very interesting question, and it's kind of a daily discussion for us at Nissan, perhaps, being one of the most diversified companies that you can find in Japan. Like I mentioned, it's not just about gender diversity, but we have diversity of nationalities, and there's a lot of multicultural elements that are there. It's interesting. One thing I think I would say the fortunate part is I come from India. So I think being born in a multicultural environment, being born in a country with multiple languages around you, I suppose most of us are brought up to be more receptive to the diversity of what we face today. This is something that I would say, and it has helped me in multiple countries. It's not just about Japan. You seem to have a natural ability to be more conscious and more patient when you deal with multicultural environments and language, especially because one of the most difficult things, and I wouldn't say Japan is very difficult, but it's the same case with Southeast Asia. I lived in Bangkok for 4 years, been traveling to Vietnam and Indonesia and all these countries, and language has always been the biggest challenge because I suppose in India, when you grow up and the times that I grew up, some of us have studied in English schools, but we were also exposed to people who did not study in English schools. And we've seen how many English speaking classes run in India with the obsession that we've got to learn the language, but you don't see the same amount of acceptance for English in these countries. And it does become difficult to convey, especially when you're working in a corporate environment and a bilingual environment. One of the biggest challenges is to be able to communicate. It's the basic that you have. Yes, because mostly everything happens in both languages. So, and both languages are not very similar. Especially working in communications, our biggest challenge is every language has its own expression, every language has its own words, and the meanings are different. So I'm kind of surprised. I just heard about the translation software. One of the biggest challenges we've got is translation. And when I was doing my university, I was doing a paper on translation, and I did publish a book translating stories from an Indian language to English. And we used to call it transcreation because you can never literally translate language. So this is one of the biggest challenges. The second thing that comes is a women working in a multicultural environment, there's a plus point. And this links to what I said is the emotional connect. So I think there is, we do have a little bit more patience and conscience, I would say, when dealing with other languages and other cultural elements that we face. However, we tend to, sometimes if you look at it, the way we express may not be something that's easily received by Japanese culture, which is a little bit more formal. And in India, you're not really that formal, but you fall somewhere in between, right? So, and we face this all the time. We've got Americans, we have French, we have Indians, and we have Japanese and Chinese, and each of them has a very different way of talking. It's a very interesting example I'll give you. My first week in Nissan, and I met one of these executives in R&D, and I was supposed to go and talk to him about, introduce myself and that. And I started talking, and in 15 minutes later, I realized he was actually looking at my hands because they were just moving, and they usually never move their hands. So I was feeling that, and they don't look at you, they're looking at your hands. So it was a very odd feeling, and in a moment I froze. I was like, why is he focused more on my hands? And I had to put my hands under the table just to free myself to start talking. But you could see that there's a bit of a cultural difference there, which comes in where you know that people tend to focus on maybe on your body language, which is different from their body language, on your expressions, which are completely different. I report to the CCO. I talk to him through an interpreter, and every day I talk to him through an interpreter. I did that all my life in Southeast Asia too, whether I was talking to governments or media or anyone, I have this interpreter next to me. At the beginning, it was a very odd feeling to have someone who may not understand what your words mean, literally translating them to somebody else. But after some time, you kind of assume that they are your voice, and the person disappears. And I was telling the interpreter yesterday that I've come to a stage where I don't recognize that the third person in the room anymore. It's like it just becomes like your voice is coming out, but it's coming out from somewhere else, not from yourself. So one of the things is that's a big challenge when you work in a multilingual environment. That's one. And the third one, and I don't want to take too much time, is also we do realize that corporates are very, very, very accommodating these days. Every corporate has KPIs on gender diversity. Every women's forum that I attend, people talk about how much has it increased in percentages. I think even Japan, even now, 18% is where we are in terms of gender diversity in corporates. And the Prime Minister, the ex-Prime Minister Abe-san was also trying to claim to say, we need to increase that in Japan. These are numbers, and these have always been numbers. How much ever efforts are being made, there is still a lack of women leadership in corporates still. And I wouldn't blame it's because of corporates, or I wouldn't blame because of biases or barriers, but there is an invisible glass ceiling that does exist. And it becomes even more harsher when you are a brown woman and working in an environment. And these biases are so inbuilt, sometimes you don't feel it, but sometimes you do feel it. So it does exist, and how do we overcome a subject of discussion in many of the forums, I suppose.
Thank you.